What would you do if you saw a little girl walking alone in the dark, barefoot, with no one to help her? Would you stop? Would you care? Or would you just drive past like everyone else? Before we begin this incredible story, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Viral Tales so you never miss stories that touch the heart. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. The sky was still black when Maya woke up. No alarm clock rang in her tiny house. No mother called her name sweetly from the kitchen. She simply opened her eyes because her body knew it was time. Time to walk. Time to chase the one thing that made her heart beat faster. School. Maya was only 9 years old, but she understood something that many adults forget. She understood that dreams don't come to you while you sleep. You have to wake up and walk toward them, even when the road is long and your feet are bare. She lived in a small village where houses were made of old wood and rusty metal sheets. The kind of place where chickens walked freely in the morning and dust covered everything by noon. Her home had one room, one window, and more love than furniture. Her grandmother was all she had, a woman with wrinkled hands and a tired smile who worked all day washing clothes for people in the big city. Every morning, Maya would fold her thin blanket, splash cold water on her face from a bucket outside, and put on her school uniform. The uniform was gray and faded from too many washes. It had patches on the elbows and a button missing near the collar. But to Maya, it was the most beautiful outfit in the world because it meant she was a student. It meant she belonged somewhere. Her school bag was old and torn. The strap was tied together with string because the original one had broken months ago. Inside, she carried 3 notebooks, 2 pencils, and a broken eraser she shared with her best friend. That was all she owned for school, but it was enough. It had to be. The hardest part wasn't waking up early. It wasn't even the homework she did by candlelight every night. The hardest part was the walk. 10 miles. That's how far her school was from her home. 10 miles of rough road, sharp stones, and empty silence. Most children her age were still dreaming in warm beds when Maya stepped out into the darkness. She didn't have shoes. Her grandmother couldn't afford them, so her small feet had grown tough from walking on gravel and mud every single day. Sometimes her heels would crack and bleed, but she never stopped. She never turned back. The road was lonely, so lonely that even the birds hadn't started singing yet. Street lights didn't exist in her village. Only the moon kept her company, hanging in the sky like a quiet friend. Maya would hum softly to herself as she walked. Songs her mother used to sing before she went to heaven. The tunes made her feel less alone. Cars would pass her sometimes. Big, shiny cars with tinted windows and loud engines. They zoomed by so fast that dust would fly into her face. But none of them ever stopped. The people inside were too busy, too important, too comfortable to notice a small girl walking in the dark. To them, she was invisible. Just another poor child they could ignore. Maya didn't blame them. She had learned early that the world doesn't stop for people like her. If she wanted something, she had to walk toward it herself. And so she did, every single morning. Rain or shine, hot or cold, sick or healthy. She walked. On this particular morning, something different happened. Something that would change everything. A red sports car appeared behind her just as the sun started peeking over the hills. It was the kind of car that looked like it belonged in a movie. Shiny, expensive, and completely out of place on that dusty village road. The engine purred like a satisfied cat, smooth and powerful. Inside the car sat a man named Richard Cross. He was a millionaire, the kind of man who wore suits that cost more than most people earned in a year. His watch was gold. His shoes were leather. His life was luxury. He owned hotels, restaurants, and buildings that touched the sky. People respected him. Some feared him. Everyone knew his name. Richard was driving back from a business meeting in a nearby town. He usually took the highway, but that morning, road construction forced him to take a detour through the villages. He wasn't happy about it. Village roads were bumpy and slow. They wasted his precious time. That's when he saw her, a tiny figure walking alone in the early morning light. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. Who lets a child walk alone before sunrise? He slowed down his car, curious and slightly annoyed. Where were her parents? Why wasn't she in a car or a bus like normal children? As he got closer, he noticed her bare feet, her torn school bag, the way she walked with her head held high even though everything about her screamed poverty. Something stirred inside him, something uncomfortable, something he hadn't felt in years. Richard had grown up poor too, though he never talked about it anymore. He had buried those memories under money and success. But watching Maya walk reminded him of things he had forgotten, things he had chosen to forget. He didn't know why, but instead of driving past her like everyone else, he decided to follow her, slowly, quietly. He wanted to see where she was going. He wanted to understand why a little girl would walk alone in the dark. It's probably just a short walk, he told himself, maybe a mile or two. But as the minutes turned into an hour and the miles kept stretching ahead, Richard realized something shocking. This child wasn't taking a short walk. She was on a journey that would soon teach him the most important lesson of his entire life. Maya didn't know someone was following her. She never looked back. Her eyes were always forward, always on the road ahead. In her mind, she was already at school, sitting at her desk, learning new things. That's what kept her going. Her feet hurt. They always hurt. But she had learned to ignore the pain. Pain was just something that came with wanting something badly enough. Her grandmother always said, "Nothing worth having comes easy, my dear." And Maya believed that with all her heart. As she walked, she whispered her lessons to herself. Yesterday, her teacher had taught them about numbers. Addition and subtraction. Maya loved numbers. They made sense. They had rules. If you worked hard enough, you could always find the answer. She mumbled the problems quietly, her lips moving as she counted on her fingers. 7 plus 8 equals 15. 15 minus 3 equals 12. Behind her, Richard watched through his expensive windshield. He had turned off his music. The silence in his car felt heavy and strange. He was used to filling every moment with noise. Phone calls, meetings, podcasts about making more money. But now, all he could hear was the soft rumble of his engine and the sound of his own breathing. He looked at the clock on his dashboard. She had been walking for over an hour. His meetings were waiting. His assistant had called 3 times. But he couldn't bring himself to drive away. Something about this little girl had grabbed hold of his attention and wouldn't let go. The morning sun climbed higher, and the heat began to press down on them both. Maya's forehead glistened with sweat. She wiped it away with the back of her hand and kept moving. Her pace never changed. Steady, determined, like a small soldier marching toward battle. Richard noticed everything. The way her shoulders stayed straight, even though her bag must have been heavy. The way she stepped carefully over the biggest rocks to protect her bare feet. The way she smiled at nothing in particular, as if she carried joy inside her that nothing could steal. A bus rumbled past them, old and overcrowded. People hung from the doors and windows. It splashed through a puddle left over from last night's rain. Dirty water sprayed across Maya, soaking her uniform and face. Richard flinched, expecting her to cry or scream or at least stop walking. But Maya just wiped her face with her sleeve and kept going. She didn't complain. She didn't cry. She simply continued her journey as if nothing had happened. That's when something cracked inside Richard's chest. A feeling he couldn't name. It felt like shame mixed with wonder mixed with an ache, so deep it made him grip the steering wheel harder. When was the last time he had worked this hard for anything? When was the last time he had faced real struggle? He thought about his morning routine. Coffee made by his housekeeper. Breakfast prepared by his chef. Clothes laid out by his assistant. His car warmed up and ready. Everything handed to him without effort. This child had nothing, yet she had everything that mattered. Purpose, determination, hope. Richard's phone rang again. His business partner, angry that he was late for their meeting. Richard stared at the phone, then at Maya walking ahead. For the first time in 20 years. He pressed the red button. He declined the call. Money could wait. This moment couldn't. Mile after mile, Maya walked. The sun grew hotter. Sweat ran down her back. Her stomach growled with hunger. She hadn't eaten breakfast. There wasn't any food at home. But she had learned to ignore hunger too. Her grandmother said education was more important than a full belly. You can survive one day without food, she would say. But a day without learning is a day wasted. Richard watched her reach into her tiny bag and pull out a small plastic bottle. It was filled with water. She took one sip, just one, then put it back, saving it, rationing it like it was liquid gold. His own car had 6 bottles of expensive mineral water rolling around in the back seat. Water he often forgot to drink. The difference between their worlds felt like a canyon, so wide he could barely see across it. He thought about his daughter, Isabella. She was the same age as Maya, maybe even younger. Isabella had everything. A big room with pink walls, toys she never played with, closets full of clothes she never wore, a driver who took her to an expensive private school 5 minutes away. And yet, she complained every morning. She whined about waking up early. She cried when her favorite cereal wasn't available. What would Isabella do if she had to walk 10 miles to school? Richard already knew the answer. She wouldn't make it past the first mile. But this girl, this tiny warrior in a faded uniform, had walked 6 miles already, and she showed no signs of stopping. A memory flashed through Richard's mind. He was 8 years old, standing outside a bakery with his mother. They were poor, so poor that meals were a luxury. He remembered pressing his face against the glass, staring at the cakes and bread inside. His mother held his hand tight and said, "One day, son, you'll buy this whole bakery if you want. But first, you have to work harder than anyone else." He had worked hard. He had climbed from nothing to everything. But somewhere along the way, he had forgotten where he came from. He had forgotten what real struggle looked like. He had forgotten that courage doesn't wear expensive suits. Maya stumbled slightly on a loose stone, but caught herself. She paused for just a moment, took a deep breath, and continued. Her small feet left prints in the dust, prints that would disappear with the next wind. But Richard knew he would remember those footprints forever. The road curved ahead, winding through hills covered in dry grass. In the distance, Richard could finally see something. A building, small and broken-looking, but definitely a building. Was that her school? Had they finally reached the end? He checked his odometer. 9 miles. They had traveled 9 miles. His heart pounded with a strange mixture of anticipation and dread. He needed to see where this journey ended. He needed to understand what could possibly be worth this kind of sacrifice. Maya saw the building too, and for the first time that morning, she began to run. Maya's run was not fast. Her legs were tired. Her feet ached with every step, but joy pushed her forward. The building ahead meant she had made it. Another day, another chance to learn, another step closer to her dreams. Richard parked his car far enough away that she wouldn't notice him. He didn't want to scare her or interrupt whatever sacred routine was about to unfold. He stepped out of his air-conditioned vehicle, and the heat hit him like a wall. How had she walked through this heat for hours? The sign above the building was old and crooked. Hand-painted letters spelled out Sunrise Primary School. Some of the letters had faded. The I in primary was almost invisible. The building itself looked like it might fall down if the wind blew too hard. The walls were cracked. The roof had holes covered with pieces of plastic and metal. The windows had no glass, just empty frames. This was a school? Richard had seen his company's storage rooms that looked better than this. Maya ran through the open gate, and suddenly everything changed. Children appeared from everywhere. Some came from the same direction Maya had walked. Others emerged from hills and fields surrounding the school. All of them looked the same. Thin, poor, wearing uniforms that had seen better days. But every single face wore a smile. "Maya!" A little boy shouted, running toward her. "You made it." "I always make it, Samuel," Maya laughed, hugging her friend. "Did you finish the homework?" "Almost," Samuel said, grinning. "I got stuck on question 5. Can you help me?" "Of course." Richard watched from behind a tree, feeling like a spy in a world he didn't understand. The children gathered in the dusty yard, talking and laughing like they were at the most wonderful place on earth. They didn't see the broken walls. They didn't care about the missing windows. They only saw opportunity. A woman appeared in the doorway. She was young, maybe in her 20s, with kind eyes and a dress that had been sewn and re-sewn many times. This must be the teacher. She rang a bell, and the sound echoed across the village like a call to worship. "Good morning, my bright stars," she called out. Her voice was warm and full of love. "Good morning, Miss Rachel." The children shouted back in unison. They lined up, smallest to tallest, and marched into the building with pride. Maya was near the front because she was one of the shortest. Richard crept closer, drawn by something he couldn't explain. He needed to see inside. He needed to understand, through the empty window frame. He watched them enter the classroom. There were no proper desks, just old wooden benches and tables that wobbled. The chalkboard was cracked down the middle. The floor was dirt, not tile. There were no computers, no projectors, no fancy equipment, just chalk, a few books, and 30 children hungry for knowledge. Miss Rachel began the lesson. Mathematics. She wrote problems on the board, and little hands shot up into the air, eager, excited, fighting for the chance to answer. These children weren't being forced to learn. They wanted to learn. They were desperate to learn. Richard saw Maya raise her hand for every question. When Miss Rachel called on her, Maya stood up proudly and gave the right answer. The class clapped for her, not because they had to, but because they were genuinely happy for each other's success. Then something happened that made Richard's throat tighten with emotion. Miss Rachel pulled out one pencil from her bag. Just one. It was short, almost completely used up. "We only have one pencil today," she said gently. "Who needs it most?" Hand went down. Every child looked at each other. Then Samuel spoke up. "Maya should have it. She walked the farthest." "No," Maya said quickly. "Give it to Grace. Her grandmother is sick. She needs to study extra hard so she can become a doctor one day." A little girl named Grace shook her head. "Give it to Thomas. He's the best at writing. He shouldn't waste his gift." Back and forth they went, not fighting over the pencil, but fighting to give it away. Each child wanted their friend to have it more than themselves. Richard had never seen anything like it. In his world, people fought to take. Here, children fought to give. Finally, Miss Rachel smiled. "We'll share it. We'll pass it around. Everyone gets a turn." And that's what they did. They shared. One pencil, 30 children, 0 complaints. Richard felt something wet on his cheeks. He touched his face, surprised. Tears. He was crying. When was the last time he had cried? He couldn't remember. The lesson continued, and then Miss Rachel asked a question that would break Richard completely. "Children, tell me your dreams. What do you want to be when you grow up?" Hands shot up again. A boy said, "A doctor, so I can heal people for free." A girl said, "An engineer, so I can build better houses for everyone." Another said, "A farmer, so nobody goes hungry." Then Maya stood up. Her voice was clear and strong. "I want to be a teacher, Miss Rachel, just like you, so that no child has to walk 10 miles to go to school. I want to build schools in every village. I want every child to learn without pain. I want to give them the gift you gave me, hope." The classroom erupted in applause. Miss Rachel wiped her own tears. And outside, Richard Cross, millionaire, businessman, man of luxury, felt his knees in the dust. He had spent his entire life building an empire of money. He owned hotels where one night cost more than these children's families earned in a year. He wore watches that could feed this entire school for months. He drove a car that could build 10 classrooms. And for what? So he could feel important? So he could prove he was successful? This 9-year-old girl with no shoes and one pencil had just shown him what real success looked like. Real wealth wasn't in his bank account. It was in the fire burning inside hearts like Maya's. It was in the love these children had for each other. It was in the dream of giving, not taking. Richard stood up slowly. His expensive suit was covered in dust. He didn't care. He walked to his car, opened the trunk, and pulled out his phone. But this time, he wasn't checking his stocks or his emails. He was making a different kind of call. "Hello, James?" It's Richard. Cancel all my meetings for the next month. I have a new project, the most important one of my life. 3 months later, Sunrise Primary School looked different. The roof was fixed. Glass filled the windows. Real desks stood in rows. A library had been built. A kitchen served meals to every child. And most importantly, 2 school buses now drove through the villages every morning, picking up children who used to walk alone. But Richard didn't just throw money at the problem. He came back, week after week. He helped paint walls. He read stories to the children. He learned their names and their dreams. And Maya became his teacher, showing him that the richest person isn't the one who has the most, but the one who gives the most. On the first day the school buses ran, Richard stood at Maya's village. When she walked out, ready to begin her 10-mile journey, she stopped in surprise. "Mr. Richard, what are you doing here?" He smiled, his eyes bright with tears of joy. "I'm here to make sure you never walk alone again. Climb in, Maya. Your chariot awaits." She looked at the bus, at him, and back at the bus. Then she did something he would never forget. She took his hand and said, "Thank you for seeing me. Most people look, but they don't see." In that moment, Richard understood. Maya had saved him more than he had saved her. She had reminded him that life isn't about what you own. It's about who you help. It's about the footprints you leave behind. And from that day forward, Richard Cross wasn't just a millionaire. He was a man with purpose. A man who had learned the most valuable lesson from the smallest teacher. Sometimes, the people who have the least have the most to teach us. And sometimes, a 10-mile walk can change not just one life, but 2.